It's my NHL DFS picks for Friday, February 7th. We're starting right now. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy sports video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a more profitable DraftKings player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. And I will say this every single day until each of you guys hear me. If you want in the drawing for 20 DK bucks, make sure you put in the comments your favorite stack for tonight's NHL slate. Before we completely dive into today's 4-game slate, I want to talk a little bit about last night. This is one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that I did to stay accountable for my own plays, but also talk a little bit about some of the discussions we had in the Discord channel. So at center yesterday, as you guys know, Nathan MacKinnon was massive chalk, 22.5% ownership, really high in terms of NHL. He did have an assist and 3 shots. I'm going to consider this one a failure, though. At 8,500, you're hoping to get a little bit more than that out of him. The other guy we talked about in the video, Suzuki at 4,400, really just a great value for the type of usage he was seeing on the power play. He did score and get 2 shots, just 3.3% ownership for him. So that was surprising to me, but it was nice for our subscribers to get there. Winger, Mike Hoffman, 4,600. Guy just seemed like he was at least $1,000 underpriced to me. We talked about him a decent amount in the Discord as well. Did get a goal on the power play, 3 shots. You just know that historically this is a guy that's going to get his in terms of peripherals if he does end up scoring. Just a great price tag for a guy that was in a great spot. The other winger we talked about was Tuck for the Vegas Golden Knights. He was 3,800. I still think the process was okay here. He ended up getting 3 peripherals, 2 shots, and a block. At just 2% ownership, I was still pretty happy with that. They scored a bunch of goals in that game. Tuck just didn't happen to get on the score sheet. At defense, we talked about Roman Josi. Guy's just an absolute staple for DFS hockey. 2 assists, but look at the peripherals, guys. Even if he doesn't get those assists, 6 shots, 2 block shots. Like, if this guy hits the block shot bonus as well in this game, 8.6% is just way too low owned for Roman Josi. The other guy we talked about on defense in yesterday's video was Parayko for the St. Louis Blues. Nice little discount off of Pietrangelo, only 4,200. He was 4.9% owned. And by the way, I should have mentioned that percent ownership is in the large DraftKings tournament, the lower dollar tournament. So he did score a goal, 4 shots and 2 blocks. Both of these guys just missing the block shot bonus as well. So could have been an even bigger day for both of these guys. So I was really happy with the guys we talked about on defense yesterday. Goalie is where things kind of went wrong for us. Unfortunately, the one guy we talked about, Elliott, 8,200. It's a pretty expensive price tag for a guy that was going to get us negative points on DraftKings. Obviously, Philadelphia gets blown out yesterday in that loss, or at least Elliott gives up a bunch of goals, which wasn't ideal. The other goalie we talked about would have been the Edmonton Oilers starting goaltender. So it ended up being Koskinen at 7,800 on DraftKings. He also lost and got negative DK points. So kind of the reality of DK scoring these days is if you do get that loss and he ends up giving up a decent amount of goals, you're probably going to be in the negative. So goalie is a really tough part of this sport and this DFS sport in general. So we'll try and do better today at goaltender, but it was a rough night overall. Really held back some of my teams from really finishing up high in GPPs last night. The good news is some of the players we talked about in the Discord in particular really did well. We talked about the potential of playing Archibald with McDavid. He was about 3K on DraftKings, but when Gagne ended up going up to that first line for Edmonton at 2,600, he was basically a lock. He got there for us, 5 shots and a block, and did score. Just 5.9% ownership. Those are the type of things that we'll talk about throughout the day that you really need to get on if you're taking this seriously. Pacioretty at 7K at winger is, I always kind of struggle at times to pay up at the winger position, but Pacioretty is just so far on the other side of being like, he's like one of those guys that has so much shooting volume, it makes up for not having any block shots. So he just ended up having an insane amount of upside here. 2 goals and an assist, which was great, 10% ownership. So he definitely wasn't sneaky by any means, but one of the core plays we were trying to build around yesterday. Brady Tkachuk, 6,200. Seemed like he was a little bit overpriced relative to the spot, but he is a guy that you can get in tournaments at lower ownership because a lot of people don't want to click these Ottawa players. 7 shots on goal, gets 1 on the power play. So I really like that Tkachuk ended up being low owned. Hamonic at 3,900, a punt defenseman that we were talking about, did get the block bonus. So even if he doesn't get this assist, guys, the peripherals are really what we're focused on here. At 3,900 at 2.2% ownership, I thought that was a great call, and definitely think that if you guys want to continue to work through these things throughout the day in the Discord, totally up for that. If you're not in the Discord, make sure you jump in there and we can walk through these things together. Gonna do my best to cut this a little bit shorter than it was yesterday, but we do only have 4 games to talk about. So the first thing that I want to do on this data sheet, and again, I walk through how to use this and how I like to use this in a video that I posted in the Discord. So make sure you jump in there and check that out if you're a little bit confused along the way. The first thing I like to do is just look at which game is going to have a lot of pace. So defensively, this is just a metric that I put together that will try and capture 2 teams that are giving up a lot of Corsi for on the defensive side. So today, the teams that I'd be focused on in terms of high pace, this isn't a crazy high pace game by any means, but I do think that Columbus and Detroit is at least interesting. The problem with this overall is that Detroit and Columbus, they don't shoot the puck a ton. And in general, I'm always trying to target these teams that are going to be shooting a decent amount as well. And the problem, there's a couple problems here. The first one is that I'm not actually actively trying to target Columbus on the matchup side of things. They're only giving up 16% of their scoring chances in the high danger areas. So that's the second worst on the slate. I don't love that. I will say that Detroit has been a little bit above average in terms of generating those high danger chances, but it's definitely a data point that I'm paying attention to. Columbus on the other side, Detroit's just not been good, guys. I will say that they're one of the teams that we could be targeting today. I think you could argue that it's one of the best matchups on the slate. The problem is Columbus just hasn't played very well lately. The Corsi they have been generating, it hasn't been very voluminous, and I definitely think that they're not generating barely any high danger scoring chances either. Like by far the worst on the slate in terms of how they've been playing offensively recently. So I think we can look past kind of the pace a little bit here. That the team that I really want to talk about today is going to be the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is going to be something you'll hear me talk about a lot throughout the rest of the season. I love Toronto. I love some of the weapons that they have in terms of fantasy hockey, and they really just generate a ton of Corsi overall. But the thing that I love about Toronto is they're definitely an analytics-based team, which shows in the data, right? They're a team that generates a lot of high-danger scoring chances, and the Corsi that they do generate is going to be in the better angle areas of the rink anyway. So I like this spot, even though it's mostly neutral here in terms of the matchup against Anaheim. I do really like in general going after Toronto today. The next team that I really want to talk about, unsurprisingly, is going to be right below Toronto. And I do think that the New York Rangers are a team that I'll be focused on today. There's a couple things here that would worry me a little bit more if you wanted to say fade Toronto and in favor of only the Rangers, and then maybe you find another team to stack up today. The problem is Buffalo, say what you want about them, they've played pretty well defensively. They're not really generating a ton on the offensive side of the puck, but they're not giving up much Corsi. 50.2 Corsi over the last 25 games is the lowest on the slate. It's basically a mediocre situation in terms of trying to target a high danger spot. The thing is, the Rangers are just generating so much. Like we talked about how Toronto is just generating a ton of Corsi and a ton of high danger. The Rangers are right there. And if you can make an argument that they're even slightly more upside there, and a great total for both of these teams. I think Toronto and the New York Rangers are the teams that I would be building on amount stacks, but that's kind of where I'm at. I think the field will probably be there as well relative to the Vegas lines. We know that ownership is going to kind of pretty quickly or pretty drastically, I should say, skew towards some of the higher Vegas totals. So let's see if we can find a team here that might be a little bit under the radar overall. So I actually don't hate the idea of going after Anaheim against Toronto. Toronto's a team that hasn't been playing very well lately, 4-4-2, I believe, over their last 10 games. And I think that Anaheim is kind of in a sneaky spot overall. They're a team that does generate high danger chances, even if they're not going to have a ton of volume overall. I think there's a chance Toronto's reeling a little bit here, and I actually don't mind the Anaheim side of the puck today if you wanted to get a little bit sneaky. I will say that one of the spots that I will be avoiding that I think will draw some ownership is I'm not super interested in Dallas. So there's a couple things here. I'm typically avoiding Minnesota because they typically, even if they give up Corsi, it's never going to be in the high danger areas of the ice. So they're one of those teams that really packs things in and forces you to the outside. I will say that Dallas overall is a spot where they're not really going to be taking those shots. I mean, they're one of those teams that doesn't take a lot of low danger anyway, middle of the pack in terms of high danger. So I think that it's a reasonable spot for Dallas. I just can't really see a spot where if it ends up being anywhere near the same ownership as, say, the Rangers, I guess strongly prefer the Rangers today, even though it's not a fantastic matchup. I think I prefer the less volume overall facing Buffalo if I can pretty much guarantee that there's going to be better chances in this game versus targeting a team like Minnesota or targeting a team like Columbus. Columbus is always an interesting team to kind of dissect from a matchup perspective. So if we're talking about Detroit today against the Blue Jackets actually, if we look at this, have given up the most Corsi against over the last 25 games. The problem is the Corsis they do give up. We talk about Minnesota. It's even more drastic for Columbus, that all their chances that they're giving up are going to be in the low danger areas, and they're definitely not giving up much in the high danger areas. And that's what we really want to focus on for teams that could be trying to score goals. And on a 4-game slate, I don't think I'm going to get too cute today. Let's start with the center position, and this will not come as a surprise to many of you that have been following me for hockey for a long time. Austin Matthews, Toronto Maple Leafs. He's probably one of my favorite players in the NHL, not just because he played in Arizona growing up, and I used to play hockey in Arizona growing up before college, but he's also a very high volume shooter in an offense that definitely takes analytics seriously, and it's just a great spot overall. 8,700 on DraftKings, 8,900 on FanDuel. He'd be a guy I'd be building my teams around today. 99th percentile shot prediction, 99th percentile Corsi, 99th percentile shots plus blocks. This is a staple of what we should be going after in terms of paying up, in my opinion. So think Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, like these high volume running backs in NFL. If you're playing NHL, these are the type of peripherals you would target. Hopefully you get there in terms of goals as well. He happens to be an elite goal scorer. So that's basically Xing out basically everything you want. So 73.2% of Toronto's power play time over the last 3 games has been with Austin Matthews on the ice. So I mentioned this yesterday. Obviously, we didn't get there with McKinnon, but the thought process there is just targeting these players that are going to be out there for the majority of the power play time anyway. It doesn't really matter to me if the guy's on the second power play and if it's one of those teams that doesn't really play those guys anyway. So you don't have to worry about that with Matthews. The highest implied team total on the slate. Toronto does have the highest Corsi for over the last 10, the last 25, and the second best high danger scoring chances of that as well. So love Toronto today. The next center I want to talk about, you're not going to get a ton of savings here either. Mika Zibanejad for the New York Rangers. He's another guy that I target historically quite a bit. 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. It looks to me like a slate where I'm going to be paying up at the center position. I do like both these guys. Zibanejad, 99th percentile shots plus blocks, 97th in shot prediction, and 97th in Corsi 4. Those are all over the last 15 days. So not quite there with Matthews, but it's really splitting hairs at this point. I think both these guys are fantastic plays. The Rangers, second highest implied team total on the slate. And the Rangers do have the second highest Corsi 4 over the last 10, the last 25, and the best high danger in terms of the offense they've been producing lately. So I do like the Rangers quite a bit. The big concern with Zibanejad is the power play time's actually been really spread out for the Rangers over the last 3 games. And Buffalo, like we talked about in the game environment section, the stack section, they've been playing pretty well on defense. So if I had to choose between the two, it's still probably going to be Matthews, but I do like Zibanejad a lot. At the winger position, like this is historically the position where I'm trying to gain a little bit of value depending on what defenseman and centerman we have on the slate, but it is a small slate. So one of the guys I want to talk about first is Pavel Buchnevich. He is the Rangers' first line winger as well, so you can stack him up with Zibanejad. 4,400 on DraftKings, 4,800 on FanDuel, 97th percentile Corsi 4 over the last 15 days. I do think that one of the guys that, at least over the longer term, will give us a nice amount of shooting volume. He's definitely a goal scorer, 91st percentile shot prediction, very solid 90th in terms of his shots plus blocks over the last 15 days, and 95th percentile shot attempts over that same time period. So I definitely think that Buchnevich is probably underpriced specifically for this slate. And like I said, you can stack him on that first line for the Rangers. The problem is he's not currently on the first power play unit. I mentioned it's been a little bit spread out overall for the Rangers, so that's definitely a concern. Only 15.7% of the team's power play time over the last 3 games for Buchnevich. Kevin Fiala for Minnesota, I do think that this is a spot that I'm not super excited about, but if you're looking for a one-off, I think he's at least interesting at 4K on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. 99th percentile shots plus blocks over the last 15 days, 96th percentile power play shot attempts over that same time period, and 88th percentile shot prediction. At that price tag, definitely think that that's interesting. My concern, or my first concern, I should say, it's definitely a low implied team total for the Wild. Dallas has allowed the 3rd fewest high danger chances over the last 25 days. And I do think that the next concern is recency bias. Did anyone see this goal last night? That's enough for me to put him on the sheet. Let's move on to D. Now, defense today, again, 4-game slate. We don't have some elite guys to pay up for, in my opinion, but the first guy I want to talk about, Tyson Barrie for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So 6,300 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. He's got a 98th percentile Corsi for over the last 15 days, 89th percentile time on ice. We know that time on ice is extremely important at the defense position. If they're going to be logging more ice time, there's obviously more chance for them to luck into a few more block shots. So he checks that box, 75th percentile in terms of shots plus blocks. It's not super elite for that price tag, that's for sure. And there was a couple other kind of peripheral stats that I looked at that definitely don't look great in terms of the price. But the main thing with Tyson Barrie is you can still stack him with Austin Matthews on the Toronto first power play unit. There's a lot of value in that, especially on this smaller slate. And my main concern, like I mentioned, is that he's just slightly overpriced, even for a 4-game slate for me. But I do like Barrie quite a bit. David Savard, talking kind of the other side of the salary spectrum, someone that's probably drastically underpriced. He's 3,800 on DraftKings, 3,500 on FanDuel. Savard, 99th percentile shots plus blocks over the last 15 days, 97th in terms of blocks over the past month. So he's a guy that definitely has a really solid floor, and you can use him kind of as a salary-saving pivot off of Zach Werenski, who I think will draw a decent amount of ownership without a ton of elite defensemen to go to today, like I mentioned. The concerns would be that Columbus is producing by far the fewest high danger opportunities on this slate, only 13.8% of their scoring chances over the last 10 games. But Savard, more of a floor guy, I would say anyway. He's one of those guys that definitely can get you the shot block bonus, which is really valuable at 3,800. All right, guys, let's talk about goalies. This was obviously our downfall yesterday, so let's try and do better today. The first guy I want to talk about in that same Columbus game we just mentioned, Elvis Merzlikins. I'm not even sure if I'm saying his name right, so we're just going to call him Elvis until I can look up that pronunciation. But 8,300 on DraftKings, he is 8,800 on FanDuel. 99th percentile Vegas moneyline rating, that is slate leading for today. Big time favorite in this game. 95th percentile team wins over the last month. 8-1-1 over the last 10 games. Columbus really proving a lot of people wrong this year after they lost some of those studs to free agency. I do think that this is something that I really like to look at in terms of goaltenders. Playing goaltenders on teams that are playing really well always seems to sit well and always seems to historically provide the most consistency for me. Team implied total greater than 3.5 goals. I mentioned this yesterday, but again, it makes a lot of sense. If a team's going to be projected to score goals, they have a better chance to get the win overall. So that's one of the things I'm always looking for. And Detroit is 1-8-1 over their last 10 games. They did kind of snap that big losing streak they were on, but I still think Detroit is a team we certainly want to try and target. I pay up at goaltender a little bit more than a lot of people out there just because the research I've done, longer term trends, it is almost always some of these guys that have some of these data points that I'm showing you today, and you need to pay up for that at times. So on this slate, Michael Hutchinson for Toronto is someone I'm at least considering at 8,200. I don't know if he's really a cash game consideration for me, but $7K on FanDuel is insanely cheap for this type of Vegas moneyline rating. 95th percentile there. Team implied goals greater than 3.5, so he checks that box as well. Anaheim also has the second lowest danger shot attempt percentage on the entire slate over the last 10 games. So Anaheim, if they're going to be super peripheral and kind of on the perimeter, that's always good for our goaltenders, not seeing a ton of high danger opportunities. Concern would be that Toronto is 4-4-2 over the last 10 games, like I mentioned. So they're kind of on the other side of the spectrum as a team that's not playing as well lately as I would like to see when I'm going to be paying 8,200 for a goaltender. That's all I got for today, guys. Make sure you hit the subscribe icon in the bottom right-hand corner so you don't miss anything. And if you are not in the Discord yet and you want access to that data sheet, sorry, it's the only way to get it. All my Twitch subscribers are in there talking about NHL each and every day. I'll see you guys in a bit.